She was lying face down in the dirt, blood pooling beneath her broken body. 3 cracked ribs, a wound on her forehead that would not stop bleeding, left for dead on a lonely California road by the men who had framed her for murder. She was 25 years old, and she was certain she was going to die. But then she heard hoofbeats. A stranger was coming, and that stranger would change everything. This is the story of Eleanor Whitmore, a woman who lost everything in a single night, but refused to let that be the end. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be left for dead on a dusty road in the middle of nowhere? Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, framed for a crime you did not commit, and hunted like an animal across the unforgiving landscape of the California frontier? This is the story of Eleanor Whitmore, a woman who lost everything in a single night: her reputation, her freedom, nearly her life. But this is also a story about second chances, about a stranger who chose to help when he could have looked the other way, about justice that comes to those who fight for it with everything they have, and about love that grows in the most unexpected places, blooming like wildflowers in the harsh desert soil. Remember this as you listen. No matter how broken you feel right now, no matter who left you behind, your story is not over until you decide it is. Eleanor was left for dead on that lonely California road, but she chose to rise. And so can you. If you believe that good people deserve happy endings, stay with me until the end. Because Eleanor's journey from that blood-soaked trail to the life she built afterward will remind you that no matter how dark things get, the sun always rises again. Now let me take you back to a hot August day in 1873, to a lonely stretch of road outside Weaverville, California, to a woman lying face down in the dirt wondering if each breath would be her last. The California sun beat down without mercy on the dusty trail that wound through the hills outside Weaverville. It was the kind of heat that made men seek shade and animals find water. The kind of heat that could kill a person left exposed for too long. The kind of heat that baked the earth until it cracked and turned the air itself into something that burned your lungs with every breath. Eleanor Whitmore had been lying on that trail for hours. Her white dress, once clean and proper for a respectable bank teller, was now torn and stained with dirt and blood. The fabric that had cost her 2 weeks' wages hung in tatters around her bruised body. Her honey blonde hair had come loose from its pins and lay matted against her face, sticky with dried blood from a wound on her forehead that still throbbed with each weak beat of her heart. Every breath sent sharp pain through her ribs. At least 3 of them were cracked, maybe more. She had stopped trying to move a long time ago because every attempt sent waves of agony crashing through her body that left her gasping and seeing stars. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind playing tricks on her. Sometimes she thought she heard voices calling her name. Sometimes she thought she saw shadows moving at the edge of her vision, dark figures approaching to finish what had been started. But when she managed to open her eyes, squinting against the brutal glare of the sun, there was nothing but empty road and scrubland stretching in every direction. Nothing but dust and heat and the slow approach of death. They had left her here to die, Marcus Holloway and his men. They had beaten her until she could barely stand, their fists and boots connecting with her body again and again, while she curled on the ground and tried to protect her head. Then they had dumped her on this forgotten road like garbage, like something worthless to be discarded and forgotten. They assumed the heat in the wilderness would finish what they had started. And as the hours passed and her strength faded, Eleanor began to think they might be right. She had tried to crawl toward the shade of some distant rocks, her fingers clawing at the hot dirt, her body screaming with every inch of progress. But the pain in her ribs made movement nearly impossible. After a few feet, she had collapsed and could go no further. Her arms simply refused to obey her commands. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Now she lay still, conserving what little strength remained, though she was not sure why she bothered. Her throat was so dry she could barely swallow. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, tasting of copper and dust. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that this was the end, that she would die here alone and unmourned, and no one would ever know the truth about what really happened. She thought about her mother, who had passed away 3 years earlier from the consumption that had slowly stolen her breath over the course of a terrible winter. Margaret Whitmore had been the strongest woman Eleanor ever knew, a widow who had raised her daughter alone after her husband died in a mining accident when Eleanor was just 5 years old. She had taught Eleanor to read and write and do arithmetic, skills that were rare for women in those days. skills that had gotten Eleanor her job at the bank. Her mother would be ashamed to see her like this, lying in the dirt, giving up. She thought about the little apartment she had rented in Sacramento with its view of the street below, the narrow bed with its patchwork quilt, the small desk where she balanced her accounts each evening by candlelight, the shelf of books she had collected one by one over the years. Simple pleasures, but they had been hers. She thought about all the things she had wanted to do with her life, all the places she had wanted to see. She had dreamed of visiting San Francisco one day, of seeing the great ships in the harbor and the grand hotels on Nob Hill. She had dreamed of maybe one day having a family of her own children who would grow up knowing they were loved. None of that would happen now. A fly landed on her cheek and she lacked the energy to brush it away. Let it feast. Soon there would be nothing left but bones bleaching in the California sun, and even those would eventually crumble to dust. The sun continued its slow arc across the sky, indifferent to her suffering. It had witnessed countless deaths in this harsh land and would witness countless more. One more body on one more road meant nothing to the universe. But then Eleanor heard something, a sound that cut through the haze of pain and dehydration like a knife through fog. Hoofbeats. At first she thought she was imagining it, another trick of her dying mind, like the voices she had heard earlier, like the shadows that were not really there. But the sound grew louder, more distinct, the rhythmic thud of a horse approaching at a steady pace. Real hoofbeats. A real horse. A real rider. Fear gripped her heart with icy fingers. What if it was Holloway's men coming back to make sure she was dead? What if they had changed their minds about leaving her to the elements and decided to put a bullet in her head? To be certain, she had seen what Marcus Holloway did to people who crossed him. She had watched him murder his own partner in cold blood without a flicker of remorse in his eyes. She tried to make herself smaller, pressing her body against the dirt as if she could somehow disappear into the ground. But she was too weak to do anything more than lie there and wait. Too weak to run, too weak to hide, too weak to do anything but pray that whoever was coming would either help her or kill her quickly. The hoofbeats stopped nearby. She heard the creak of leather as someone dismounted, then footsteps coming closer, crunching on the dry dirt of the road. Heavy boots, a man's boots. Each step sent vibrations through the ground that she could feel against her cheek. A shadow fell across her face, blocking the brutal sun for the first time in hours. The relief from that burning light was almost enough to make her weep. "Good Lord," a man's voice said. The words were soft, tinged with genuine concern. Not the cold cruelty she had heard in Holloway's voice, or the rough laughter of his men as they beat her. This was something different, something human. Eleanor felt hands on her shoulder, gentle, despite their obvious strength. She was turned onto her back, and she found herself looking up at a face silhouetted against the bright sky. Broad shoulders. A cowboy hat casting shadows across his features. The outline of a man who looked like he spent his days working the land, with the kind of solid build that came from honest labor, rather than barroom brawling. "Madam, can you hear me?" he asked. She tried to speak, but all that came out was a weak croak. Her throat felt like sandpaper that had been left in the sun for a week. Her tongue was swollen and dry, useless for forming words. The man moved quickly with the efficiency of someone accustomed to handling emergencies. She heard the slosh of water in a canteen and then felt blessed coolness as he dampened a bandana and pressed it to her cracked lips. "Easy now," he said. "Just a little at first. Too much too fast will make you sick." A few drops of water trickled into her mouth, and Eleanor had never tasted anything so wonderful in her entire life. It was better than the finest wine, better than the sweetest honey. It was life itself, flowing past her lips and down her parched throat. She tried to grab for the canteen, desperate for more, but her arms would not cooperate. They flopped uselessly at her sides like dead fish. The stranger seemed to understand her desperation without needing words. He lifted her head slightly, cradling it in the crook of his arm, and let her take small sips. Patient despite the obvious urgency of her condition. Patient despite the sun beating down on both of them. "What happened to you?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Who did this? Eleanor's vision was clearing slightly, the world coming into sharper focus for the first time in hours. She could make out more details of her rescuer's face now. He was perhaps 30 years old with dark hair and a strong jaw covered in a few days' worth of stubble. His eyes were brown, serious and concerned as they examined her injuries. She tried to answer his question. She wanted to tell him everything. About Holloway and the murder in the frame, about the evidence she had hidden in the men who wanted her dead. But the words would not come. Her throat was too dry, her body too weak. All she could manage was a single whispered word. Please. The stranger nodded in understanding her desperation, even without knowing the details. I have got a ranch about 5 miles from here, he said. My housekeeper can tend to your wounds. Can you sit up? Eleanor tried. She really did. But the moment she attempted to raise herself, the pain in her ribs exploded like dynamite going off inside her chest. She cried out the sound barely more than a whimper and collapsed back against the ground. The stranger winced in sympathy. All right, he said, I am going to lift you. Try to stay as still as possible. His arms slid beneath her shoulders and knees, and he lifted her with surprising gentleness. He was strong, clearly accustomed to physical labor, but he handled her as carefully as if she were made of glass. Even so, the movement sent waves of agony through her body. She whimpered and tears leaked from her swollen eyes, leaving tracks in the dirt and dried blood on her face. I know it hurts, the stranger said. His voice was close to her ear now, steady and reassuring. Just hold on. I will get you someplace safe. He carried her to his horse, a chestnut mare that waited patiently nearby, her ears pricked forward with curiosity. With some difficulty managing to balance Eleanor's weight while controlling the horse, he set her atop the saddle. Then he mounted behind her, one arm wrapped securely around her waist while the other held the reins. Lean back against me, he instructed. Try not to move too much. Eleanor had no choice but to trust this stranger. She had nothing left. No strength to fight or flee. No options to consider. No hope except for this man who had appeared out of nowhere to help her. She let her body go limp against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her back. It was strong and regular, a drumbeat of life that seemed to promise that everything would be all right, that she would survive this, that she wasn't going to die on a dusty road in the middle of nowhere. The horse began to move each step, sending small jolts of pain through her battered body. But the stranger held her steady, absorbing most of the motion, keeping her as comfortable as possible under the circumstances. As they rode, consciousness faded in and out like the tide. Sometimes she was aware of the landscape passing by, the scrubby hills and scattered trees of the California frontier, the dust clouds rising from the horse's hooves, the endless blue sky stretching overhead. Sometimes she slipped into dark dreams where shadows chased her and rough hands grabbed at her arms. Where Holloway's face loomed over her, his eyes cold and cruel, his voice promising that no one would ever find her body. Where she ran through endless corridors of darkness with something terrible always just behind her. Each time she startled awake, gasping and trembling, the stranger's arm tightened slightly around her waist. A silent reassurance that she was not alone, that someone was watching over her, that she was safe at least for now. You are safe now, he murmured at one point as if reading her fears directly from her mind. No one is going to hurt you here. Eleanor wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him, but she knew the truth that he did not. She was not safe. She would never be safe again. Not as long as Marcus Holloway was alive and free. Holloway had killed his own partner and framed her for the murder. He had taken the money and the gun and arranged everything to make her look guilty. The wanted posters were probably already spreading across the territory offering rewards for her capture. Dead or alive, most likely. Holloway would not take chances. And here she was helpless and dependent on the kindness of a stranger whose name she did not even know. A stranger who might turn her in the moment he learned the truth. A stranger who might be tempted by whatever reward Holloway had put on her head. The irony was not lost on her. 6 months ago, she had been a respectable bank teller in Sacramento. She had a steady job that paid well enough for a woman, a clean reputation that she guarded carefully, plans for a modest but comfortable future. She had been saving money to open her own dress shop one day using the sewing skills her mother had taught her. Now she was a fugitive, beaten within an inch of her life, with nothing to her name except the torn dress on her back and a body full of bruises and broken bones. How had everything gone so wrong so quickly? The answer was simple. She had tried to do the right thing. She had discovered that her employer was stealing from innocent people. Farmers who trusted the bank with their hard-earned savings. Widows trying to stretch their husband's life insurance. Shopkeepers saving for their children's futures. Good, honest people being robbed by men in expensive suits who smiled and shook their hands while picking their pockets. And Eleanor had refused to look the other way. That single act of integrity had cost her everything. The horse slowed and Eleanor forced her eyes open. Through blurred vision, she saw buildings coming into view. A two-story farmhouse with a wide porch and curtains in the windows. A large barn with its doors standing open. Several smaller structures scattered across a well-maintained property. "We are here," the stranger said. "Pinewood Ranch." He dismounted carefully, one hand keeping her steady in the saddle, then reached up to lift her down. His movements were gentle, but still the pain made her gasp. Stars exploded behind her eyes, and she thought for a moment she might pass out. "Mrs. Foster," he called toward the house. "Mrs. Foster, come quickly." A door opened and a stout woman in her 50s appeared. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her face was kind despite its initial shock at the scene before her. She wore a practical dress covered by a flour-dusted apron, and her hands were strong and capable-looking. "Merciful heavens," she exclaimed, rushing forward with surprising speed for a woman her age. "What happened to this poor child?" "Found her beaten on the trail to town," the stranger explained. "She needs tending to and quick." The woman, Mrs. Foster, took charge immediately. She had the air of someone who had handled emergencies before and knew exactly what needed to be done. She directed the man to carry Eleanor inside and up the stairs to a spare bedroom. Her voice was calm but urgent, giving orders with the confidence of long experience. The room was simple but clean. An iron-frame bed covered by a colorful patchwork quilt. A washstand with a pitcher and basin. A small window that let in the afternoon light. A wooden chair in the corner, and a braided rug on the floor. As the stranger laid her down on the soft mattress, Eleanor caught his eye. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. His face was weathered from years in the sun, but there was kindness in his brown eyes. A steadiness that made her feel against all evidence and reason that she might actually survive this. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. The words felt inadequate for what he had done. He had saved her life. He had pulled her back from the edge of death with nothing more than water and kindness. But those two words were all she had to offer. He nodded, his expression serious but kind. "You just rest now, miss. You are safe here." And despite everything, despite the pain that pulsed through her body with every heartbeat, despite the fear that coiled in her stomach like a snake, despite the knowledge that her troubles were far from over and that Holloway's men might still be searching for her, despite all of that, Eleanor believed him. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to close her eyes without worrying about what might happen when they opened again. She was alive against all odds. She was alive, and somehow that had to count for something. The darkness rose up to claim her, but this time it was not the darkness of death. It was the darkness of healing sleep, of a body finally given permission to rest and begin the long process of mending itself. She was alive, and somewhere into the fog of exhaustion and pain, a tiny flame of hope flickered to life in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, her story was not over yet. The next several days passed in a haze of pain, sleep, and slowly returning strength. Eleanor learned that her rescuer's name was Samuel Crawford, though everyone called him Sam. He had owned Pinewood Ranch for 4 years, building it up from nothing with hard work and determination. He was a quiet man who kept mostly to himself, preferring the company of his horses and cattle to the bustle of town life. He had served in the war, she gathered, though he never spoke of it directly. But she could see it in the way he moved, alert and watchful, always aware of his surroundings. She could see it in the occasional distant look in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. And she could see it in the nightmares that sometimes made him cry out in the small hours of the morning, sounds that drifted up through the floorboards of the old farmhouse. Mrs. Foster, his housekeeper, had been with him since he first arrived in California. She ran his household with efficient maternal care, treating Sam like the son she never had, and now extending that same warmth to Eleanor. Mrs. Foster turned out to be an excellent nurse. She cleaned Eleanor's wounds with gentle hands, washing away the dirt and dried blood with water that had been boiled and cooled. She wrapped the cracked ribs tightly with strips of clean cloth, explaining that it would hurt, but would help them heal straight. She made sure Eleanor ate broth and bread, even when she had no appetite, insisting that the body needed fuel to repair itself. 3 ribs cracked by my reckoning, Mrs. Foster reported to Sam on the second evening. Eleanor could hear them talking in the hallway outside her door, their voices low but not quite low enough to escape her ears. That eye was swollen shut, the housekeeper continued, but it is improving now. She is covered in bruises from head to toe. Some defensive wounds on her hands, too. She fought back hard against whoever did this. Brave girl. Sam's jaw tightened at the information. Eleanor could hear the anger in his voice, even though he kept it controlled. Will she be all right with time and rest? I believe so. Mrs. Foster replied. She is young and strong. The body heals if given the chance. But it will take weeks, maybe months, before she is fully recovered. Sam was quiet for a moment. Did she say anything about her name or who did this? Mrs. Foster shook her head. Only fragments. Nothing that makes much sense. She mentioned a man named Marcus once and something about a lockbox. But mostly she just sleeps. The body knows what it needs. I will sit with her tonight, Sam said. You get some rest, Mrs. Foster. You have earned it. The housekeeper frowned. That would not be proper, Mr. Crawford. A single man in a young woman's bedroom. People would talk. I will sit in the chair by the door, he assured her. Just to be on hand if she wakes frightened or needs anything. You can check on us whenever you like. Reluctantly, Mrs. Foster agreed. And so Sam spent that night in an uncomfortable wooden chair just inside the bedroom door, dozing lightly and waking at every sound from the bed. The chair was too small for his frame, and the angle was wrong for sleeping, but he did not complain. Near dawn, Eleanor began to thrash in the grip of a nightmare. No, please, she cried out. I do not have it. Stop, please stop. Her arms flailed against invisible attackers. Her legs kicked at the tangled sheets. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and her breathing came in ragged gasps. Sam moved to her bedside, hesitating for just a moment before gently touching her shoulder. Miss, you are safe now. No one is going to hurt you here. Her eyes flew open, wild with fear. For a moment, she seemed not to recognize him, her body tensing as if preparing to flee or fight. Her hands came up defensively and she pressed herself back against the headboard. Then gradually her gaze focused on his face. Recognition flickered in her eyes, followed by confusion, then relief. Water, she whispered. Sam helped her sit up slightly, supporting her back as she sipped from the glass he held to her lips. The simple kindness of the gesture, so different from what she had experienced at the hands of Holloway's men, brought tears to her eyes. Thank you, she managed when she had drunk her fill. Her voice was stronger than it had been on the trail, though still rough from disuse. You are welcome. Sam set the glass aside on the nightstand and stepped back to give her space. Can you tell me your name? She hesitated. Telling him her name meant admitting who she was. If he had seen the wanted posters, if he knew she was accused of murder and theft, he might turn her over to the authorities. Or worse, he might be tempted by the reward money. Times were hard on the frontier. Good men had done bad things for less. But she looked into his steady brown eyes and saw no greed there, no suspicion, only genuine concern for her well-being and a quiet patience that said he would wait as long as necessary for her to decide whether to trust him. Eleanor, she said finally. Eleanor Whitmore. Miss Whitmore. He nodded slowly as if committing the name to memory. Do you remember what happened to you? Who did this? Pain shadowed her eyes. Not just the physical kind that throbbed through her body with every heartbeat, but something deeper. Something that came from betrayal and loss and the shattering of everything she had believed about the world. I cannot say. I should not involve anyone else in my troubles. You have been kind, more kind than I deserve, but once I am able, I should go. Sam frowned. You are welcome to stay as long as you need. Whatever trouble you are in, perhaps I can help. No. She shook her head, then winced at the pain the movement caused. They are dangerous men. They will kill anyone who interferes. I have already put you at risk just by being here. They, Sam raised an eyebrow. So there is more than one person after you. Eleanor realized she had revealed more than she intended. The fever and exhaustion had loosened her tongue, let slip details she should have kept hidden. Please, Mr. Crawford, the less you know, the safer you will be. Sam considered pressing further. She could see the questions forming behind his eyes, the natural curiosity of a man who liked to understand the situations he found himself in. But he also recognized the fear in her voice. It was the fear of someone who had witnessed terrible things and expected more terrible things to come. He had seen that fear before, in the eyes of soldiers during the war, in the faces of settlers whose homesteads had been raided. He knew better than to push. All right, he said gently. But you are staying put until you are healed. I will not have you wandering off to get yourself killed after I went to the trouble of finding you." A ghost of a smile touched Eleanor's lips. It was the first time she had smiled in days, and it transformed her face despite the bruises that still marked her features. "You are stubborn, Mr. Crawford. So I have been told." He allowed himself a slight grin. "Rest now. Mrs. Foster will bring you some broth when you wake." Over the next several days, a rhythm established itself at Pinewood Ranch. Eleanor slept much of the time, her body working to repair the damage it had suffered. When awake, she accepted Mrs. Foster's motherly care and Sam's occasional visits with increasing comfort. He would come by in the afternoons, usually after finishing his work with the cattle. Sometimes he brought her books from his modest library: poetry by Tennyson and Longfellow, novels by Dickens and Cooper. He apologized for the limited selection, explaining that he was not much of a reader himself, but the books had belonged to his mother, and he could not bring himself to part with them. Sometimes he simply sat with her on the porch as she grew strong enough to venture outside, watching the sun sink behind the mountains, while they talked about nothing in particular. The weather, the progress of the ranch, the antics of the barn cats who seemed to multiply every spring. Eleanor learned that Sam had come to California from Missouri after the war. He had used his military pay and a small inheritance from his father to buy the ranch, building it up from nothing over 4 years of hard work. He had few friends in town and no family to speak of. "It is quiet out here," he admitted one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Some folks would call it lonely, but I have always preferred my own company." "No, wife?" Eleanor asked, then immediately felt her cheeks flush at the boldness of the question. It was not her place to ask such things. They barely knew each other. Sam shook his head, seeming not to notice her embarrassment. "Never found the right woman, I suppose. Or maybe I just never looked very hard. After the war, I wanted peace more than anything else. Solitude seemed like the price of that peace." He glanced at her, his brown eyes curious but not prying. "What about you, family waiting for you somewhere?" "My mother passed 3 years ago," Eleanor said softly. "Father died when I was young, an accident in the mines. No brothers or sisters. I have been on my own for a while now. That is a hard way to live." She shrugged, then winced as the movement pulled at her healing ribs. "You get used to it, though I suppose that is true of most hard things. You get used to them whether you want to or not." Sam nodded slowly, seeming to understand her meaning. There was something about him that invited confidence, a steadiness that made Eleanor feel like she could tell him anything and he would simply listen without judgment. But she held back. The truth of her situation was too dangerous to share, too likely to drag him into a mess that was not his to solve. She had already put him at risk simply by being here. She would not make it worse by telling him everything. Not yet, anyway. On the fourth day, Sam brought her a book of poetry by Tennyson. "Thought you might be getting bored," he explained, setting it on her bedside table. "Not much for reading myself, but my mother loved this one. She used to read it to me when I was a boy." "That is very thoughtful of you," Eleanor said, genuinely touched by the gesture. She reached for the book and her fingers accidentally brushed against his hand. The contact was brief, lasting only a moment, but something passed between them. A spark of connection that surprised them both. An awareness that had not been there before, or perhaps had been there all along, but neither had acknowledged. Sam cleared his throat and pulled his hand away. "I will be riding into town tomorrow. Is there anything you need?" She hesitated. "You have done far too much already, Mr. Crawford." "Nonsense, and call me Sam, please. Mr. Crawford makes me feel like my father." Eleanor smiled, the expression transforming her face despite the fading bruises that still marked her features. "Sam, then. And I am Ellie. My mother used to call me that." "Ellie," he repeated, as if testing the way the name felt on his tongue. "It suits you." He left then, and Eleanor found herself staring at the door long after he had closed it behind him. There was something about this quiet rancher that stirred feelings she had not expected to feel. Not here, not now, not when her life was in shambles and danger lurked around every corner. But the heart does not always follow logic. And despite everything, she could not deny the warmth that spread through her chest whenever Sam walked into the room. Could not ignore the way her pulse quickened when their eyes met. Could not pretend that she did not look forward to his visits more than anything else in her day. It was foolish, she told herself, reckless and foolish. She was a wanted woman accused of murder and theft. She had no business developing feelings for the man who had rescued her, But try as she might, she could not make herself stop. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she wondered if Sam felt the same way. The following morning, Sam rode into Weaverville to attend to business. Supplies at the general store, mail at the post office, a quick visit to the bank. Routine errands that he had completed dozens of times before. But this time something caught his eye as he was leaving the bank. A poster tacked to the community notice board. A crude drawing of a woman with familiar features. Honey blonde hair, delicate features, a determined set to the jaw. His blood ran cold as he read the words printed below the image. Wanted for theft and murder. Eleanor Whitmore. Reward offered for information or capture. The drawing was poor, but there was no mistaking the resemblance. The woman recovering in his home was accused of stealing $5,000 and murdering a man named Silas Thornton in Sacramento. The date on the poster was just 1 week prior. Sam stared at the poster for a long moment, his mind racing. Murder, theft, conspiracy. He thought of Eleanor's battered body, the fear in her eyes, the way she flinched at sudden movements and cried out in her sleep, the defensive wounds on her hands that Mrs. Foster had noted, signs of someone who had been the victim of violence, not the perpetrator. He thought of her gentle manner, her gratitude for simple kindnesses, the way she spoke of her mother with love and her past with sadness. Not the cold calculation of someone capable of murder, not the cunning of a thief. But he had been wrong about people before. The war had taught him that even the most innocent-seeming face could hide darkness underneath. He tore the notice from the board, folding it carefully and tucking it into his pocket. Then he turned his horse toward home, questions burning in his mind and a decision forming in his heart. He would have the truth from Eleanor Whitmore, one way or another. The ride back to Pinewood Ranch felt longer than usual, though Sam pushed his horse harder than he normally would. His mind kept returning to the wanted poster in his pocket, to the words theft and murder printed in bold black letters, to the crude drawing that looked so much like the woman sleeping in his guest room. He did not want to believe it. Everything in him resisted the idea that Eleanor, the frightened woman he had found beaten and left for dead, could be a killer. Her eyes held fear, yes, but not the cold calculation of someone capable of murder. Her manner was gentle, her gratitude genuine. But he reminded himself that he had been wrong about people before, that appearances could be deceiving, that trust had to be earned, not given freely. When he arrived at the ranch, he found Eleanor sitting on the front porch, wrapped in a quilt despite the warm afternoon sun. Mrs. Foster had helped her arrange her hair, and some color had returned to her cheeks. She looked almost healthy, almost normal, almost like a woman who had not been through hell and back. "You are looking better," Sam observed as he dismounted and tied his horse to the porch rail. "Fresh air helps," she replied with a small smile. "Mrs. Foster thought I should start rebuilding my strength." Sam nodded, his expression carefully neutral. Then he pulled the wanted poster from his pocket, unfolded it, and held it up so she could see. "Care to explain this?" The color drained from Eleanor's face so quickly that Sam thought she might faint. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair, knuckles turning white. For a moment, she looked like she might bolt despite her injuries. "Where did you get that?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Town notice board." Sam answered. He sat in the chair beside her, close enough to catch her if she tried to run far enough to give her space. "Now, I am inclined to believe there is more to this story considering the state I found you in. But I need the truth, Eleanor. All of it." She was silent for a long moment, staring at her hands. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and Sam could see the internal battle playing out on her face. Fear warred with something else. Desperation, perhaps. Or maybe hope that he would listen and understand. Finally, she looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "I did not kill Silas Thornton," she said. Her voice was steady despite the tremor in her hands. "But I am accused of it, and of stealing money that was already stolen." "Start at the beginning," Sam urged gently. She took a deep breath and began. "I was a teller at Thornton's Bank in Sacramento. I worked there for 2 years. I was good at my job. The customers liked me, and Mr. Thornton always said I had a head for numbers." She paused, gathering her thoughts. 6 months ago, I noticed something wrong. Discrepancies in certain accounts. Money moving in ways that did not make sense. Small amounts disappearing from deposits. Entries that did not match the records I had made myself. "And you investigated," Eleanor nodded. "I should have kept my head down. I should have pretended not to see. But those accounts belonged to ordinary people. Farmers, shopkeepers, widows trying to stretch their husband's savings. I could not just watch their money disappear without knowing why. What did you find Silas Thornton was embezzling? He and his partner, a man named Marcus Holloway. They had been stealing from the depositors for years. Small amounts at first, then larger ones as they got bolder. They had taken thousands of dollars from people who trusted them. Sam leaned back in his chair, processing this information. And you confronted Thornton about it foolishly, yes. Eleanor's voice turned bitter. I thought he would make it right if confronted with proof. I thought he would return the money and beg forgiveness. I was naive enough to believe that shame might motivate him to do the right thing. Instead, he threatened me. He said no one would believe a woman over a respected banker, that his associates would ensure I never spoke of it again. He said I would regret the day I ever learned to read a ledger. But you did not back down. No, she lifted her chin and Sam saw a flash of the spirit that had impressed him from the beginning. I could not just watch him steal from people who trusted him, so I gathered evidence. Ledgers, notes, letters between him and Holloway. Everything I needed to prove what they were doing, what happened then. Eleanor closed her eyes, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. Last week, Silas caught me copying ledger entries. There was a struggle. He attacked me. Tried to. She shuddered, unable to finish the sentence, but I managed to escape with some of the evidence. I was planning to take it to the federal marshal the next morning. But you never made it. I returned to my boarding house to find it ransacked. While I was hiding in the alley trying to decide what to do, two men arrived, Silas and Marcus Holloway. They were searching for the documents. She opened her eyes and Sam saw the horror of the memory reflected in them. When they could not find what they wanted, Silas became enraged. He and Holloway argued. And then, she swallowed hard, Holloway shot him, his own partner, right there in my room, without hesitation, without remorse. He shot him and watched him fall. Sam straightened in his chair. Holloway killed his own partner, right there in my room. Eleanor's voice hardened. Then he saw me hiding in the alley outside the window. He said I was the perfect solution to his problems. With me blamed for the murder and the missing money, no one would look any further. Everyone would assume the case was solved. And the evidence, Holloway took everything. The embezzled funds Silas had been carrying. The gun. He arranged the scene to make it look like I had done it. My fingerprints on the ledgers, my belongings scattered around the body. Everything pointed to me. Then they brought you out here. Holloway and three of his men. They drove me at gunpoint for 2 days far from Sacramento, far from anyone who might help, far from anyone who knew my face or might believe my story. She swallowed hard. They were going to kill me where no one would find the body, bury me in some unmarked grave in the wilderness. But they argued about whether to. She could not finish the sentence. During the argument, I managed to break free. One of them caught me, beat me badly, but I fought back, scratched his face, bit his hand, made him bleed. Something distracted them, a noise in the distance, and they left me for dead rather than risk staying to finish the job. That is when I found you. Yes. She met his gaze squarely, her blue eyes steady despite the tears that threatened to spill. That is the truth, Sam, all of it. He was quiet for a long moment, turning her story over in his mind. It explained everything, her injuries, her fear, her reluctance to involve anyone else, and it fit with what he had observed of her character over the past week. The evidence you collected, he said finally, the documents that could clear your name, where are they hidden? Eleanor allowed herself a small, grim smile. Somewhere they could not find. Somewhere they will never think to look. These men, Holloway and his associates, they will be looking for you, yes. And they are connected to powerful people, wealthy men with influence, men who will protect them because they share in the profits. She looked away. I have put you in danger just by being here. I should leave as soon as I am able to travel. Sam shook his head firmly. You are not going anywhere, not yet. Surprise flickered across her face. Do you believe me? He reached out and took her hand. His calloused fingers wrapped gently around hers, warm and steady. I am a decent judge of character, Eleanor. I have been since the war taught me to read men's faces and know who could be trusted in a fight. I have seen killers. I have seen thieves. I have seen men who would sell their own mothers for $1. You are none of those things. You are no murderer. Relief washed over her features, and for a moment she looked like she might cry. The tension that had been holding her rigid since he showed her the poster seemed to drain away, leaving her looking younger and more vulnerable than before. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for believing me." The moment stretched between them, a connection forming that neither had anticipated. Sam was acutely aware of the warmth of her hand in his, of the gratitude shining in her eyes, of the way his heart seemed to beat faster when she looked at him like that. Finally, he cleared his throat and gently pulled his hand away. "You should rest. We can talk more tomorrow about what to do next." "What to do next?" Eleanor frowned. "There is nothing to do. I cannot prove my innocence without the evidence. And I cannot get the evidence without going back to Sacramento. And if I go back there, Holloway will find me. Then we will figure out how to get the evidence and avoid Holloway at the same time." Sam stood, his decision made. "You will stay here until you are fully recovered. Then we will make a plan to clear your name. You think I am going to let you face this alone?" He looked at her with something that might have been affection, something that might have been the beginning of something more. "You landed in my path, Eleanor Whitmore. Like it or not, that makes you my concern now." She stared at him for a long moment, seeming to search his face for some sign of deception or ulterior motive. Finding none, she slowly nodded. "You are a good man, Sam Crawford." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I am just a rancher who found a woman in trouble. Anyone would do the same." Number Eleanor shook her head. "They would not. Most people would have ridden on by. Most people would have turned me in for the reward after seeing that poster." "You are different." Sam had no response to that. So he simply tipped his hat and walked toward the barn, leaving Eleanor alone on the porch with her thoughts. But as he tended to his horse, his mind was already working on the problem. Holloway was dangerous, well-connected, motivated to keep Eleanor silent permanently. Getting the evidence from Sacramento would be risky. Getting it without being caught would be nearly impossible. But Sam had faced impossible odds before. During the war, he had led his unit out of situations that should have killed them all. He had survived ambushes and sieges and desperate last stands. He had learned that impossible was just another word for difficult, and that difficult things could be overcome with enough courage and planning. This was different, of course. This was not war, but the stakes felt just as high. He thought about Eleanor sitting on his porch, bruised but unbroken. He thought about the strength it must have taken for her to stand up against powerful men who could have destroyed her with a word. He thought about the way she had fought back against her attackers even when escape seemed impossible. She was worth fighting for. He knew that as surely as he knew his own name. In one way or another, he was going to help her win. The sun was setting over Pinewood Ranch, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The cattle lowed softly in their pasture. The world was peaceful and quiet, giving no hint of the storm that was gathering on the horizon. But Sam knew the storm was coming, and when it arrived, he would be ready. 1 week after Sam found the wanted poster, Eleanor's strength had returned enough for travel. Her ribs still ached when she moved too quickly. Bruises still marked her skin in shades of yellow and green, fading reminders of the violence she had endured. But she could walk without assistance now. She could breathe without wincing, and her mind was sharp and focused on the task ahead. They had spent the week planning, going over every detail of what needed to happen in Sacramento. The evidence Eleanor had hidden was their only hope of clearing her name, and retrieving it would require careful timing and more than a little luck. "I need to return to Sacramento," Eleanor said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "The evidence I hid is the only way to prove my innocence." Sam frowned, his jaw tightening in that way she had come to recognize. It meant he was worried but trying not to show it. "You are not fully healed yet." "Healed enough," she countered. "And every day I stay here puts you at greater risk. Holloway will not stop looking for me. He cannot afford to. I am the only person alive who witnessed what he did." She leaned forward, her blue eyes intense. "And eventually someone in town will remember seeing you with a woman who matches the description on those posters. Someone will talk. Someone always talks. And then Holloway will know exactly where to find me." "You planning to just walk into Sacramento with a price on your head?" Sam challenged. "I have a friend there, a woman I trust. Dorothy Brennan. She works as a nurse at the hospital. She can help me retrieve the documents without anyone knowing I am in the city." Sam was quiet for a moment. The evening breeze stirred the leaves of the old oak tree beside the porch. Somewhere in the barn, a horse nickered softly. "When were you thinking of leaving?" he asked finally. "Tomorrow, if possible. I could take the stage from Weaverville. Travel alone so as not to draw attention." He shook his head firmly. "Not happening, Ellie. If you are determined to go, I am coming with you." "No," she started to protest, but he raised a hand to stop her. "This is not negotiable. You need someone watching your back, and I am offering. Unless you have got some objection to my company." Eleanor studied his face for a long moment. She saw the determination there, the stubborn set of his jaw that said he had made up his mind and would not be moved. But she also saw something else, something warmer, something that made her heart beat faster. "Your ranch," she said weakly. "You cannot just leave. Liam can manage things for a week." Sam referred to his ranch hand, a reliable young man who had been with him for 2 years. "Mrs. Foster will keep him in line. She has been running this place longer than I have." She had to try one more time, had to give him one more chance to change his mind. "Why would you risk yourself for me? You barely know me." Sam considered the question seriously, his brown eyes thoughtful. "Maybe because I spent 4 years out here keeping to myself, not getting involved in other people's problems. And then you quite literally landed in my path." He smiled slightly, but there was something deeper in his expression, something he was not quite ready to say out loud. "Or maybe I just have a strong dislike for men who beat women and leave them for dead." The real answer, the one that had been growing in his heart for days, remained unspoken. But Eleanor seemed to sense it anyway. Something shifted in her expression. A softening, a recognition that what was forming between them was more than simple gratitude on her part and more than simple kindness on his. "It will be dangerous," she warned. "Most worthwhile things are," he replied simply. The following morning, they set out for Weaverville to catch the afternoon stage. Sam had explained their absence to Mrs. Foster and Liam as a necessary business trip to Sacramento without elaborating on the nature of that business. The housekeeper had looked skeptical, her sharp eyes moving between Sam and Eleanor with knowing assessment. But she had held her tongue. She had worked for Sam long enough to know when not to ask questions. In town, Sam purchased tickets while Eleanor waited at a small cafe, a shawl draped over her head to obscure her features. Her heart raced every time the door opened, every time a stranger glanced in her direction. She expected at any moment to hear someone shout her name, to feel rough hands grabbing her arms, to see Holloway's cold eyes staring at her from across the room. But their luck held. No one seemed to recognize her. No one paid her any special attention. She was just another woman waiting for the stage, unremarkable and forgettable. The stage journey took 2 days with an overnight stop at a roadhouse in Reading. Neither of them slept much. They were too aware of the danger they were heading toward, too uncertain of what they would find when they arrived. The cramped quarters of the stagecoach offered little privacy for conversation, so they sat in tense silence, their shoulders touching as the coach rattled over the rough roads. At the roadhouse, they took separate rooms to maintain propriety. But Sam positioned himself in the hallway outside Eleanor's door, spending most of the night dozing in an uncomfortable chair, with his hand resting on his revolver. On the second day, as the stage rattled along the dusty road towards Sacramento, Sam noticed Eleanor's tension increasing with each mile. She sat close to him, her shoulder touching his, her eyes constantly scanning their fellow passengers. A drummer selling patent medicines, a young couple traveling to visit family, an older gentleman reading a newspaper. Ordinary people, harmless people. But Eleanor looked at each of them as if they might be an assassin in disguise. "Try to relax," Sam murmured, leaning close so only she could hear. "You look nervous, which draws attention." She nodded, making a visible effort to loosen her rigid posture. "I have not been around people since it happened. Every face looks like a threat. Every stranger seems like they might be watching me." "I know." He placed his hand over hers, a gesture that was becoming natural between them. "But you are not alone now. Whatever happens, we face it together." She turned to look at him, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the connection that had been building since the moment he found her on that dusty road. Neither spoke of it directly, neither named what it was, but both felt it growing stronger with each passing hour. By the time they reached Sacramento that evening, the sun was setting and both of them were exhausted but alert. The city was larger than Weaverville, bustling with people and activity even at this late hour. Carriages rattled through the streets. Shopkeepers closed their businesses for the night. Workers made their way home from the factories and warehouses that lined the river. Sacramento was a city of commerce and ambition, of fortune seekers and hard workers, of honest citizens and dangerous criminals. Somewhere in this maze of streets and buildings, Marcus Holloway was searching for Eleanor. Somewhere men with guns were waiting to silence her forever. "We should find rooms for the night," Sam suggested as they stepped off the stage, stretching muscles cramped from 2 days of travel. "Your friend can wait until morning." Eleanor shook her head. "Dorothy works nights at the hospital. This is the best time to find her. And I do not want to risk staying at a hotel where I might be recognized. The fewer people who see my face, the better." They hired a carriage to take them to Sacramento General Hospital, a large brick building on the edge of the city center. Eleanor asked the driver to wait, then approached the entrance with Sam close behind her. Inside, the hospital smelled of carbolic acid and illness. Nurses in starched white uniforms moved efficiently through the corridors. The sounds of suffering echoed from behind closed doors. It was a grim place, but also a place of healing, where skilled hands worked to pull the sick and injured back from the edge of death. Eleanor inquired about Dorothy Brennan, identifying herself only as a cousin visiting from out of town. The nurse at the front desk looked at her with tired eyes, then directed her to wait. After a few minutes that felt like hours, a slender woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner appeared from a back corridor. She was about Eleanor's age, with dark hair pulled back under her nurse's cap and capable hands that spoke of years of practice. The moment Dorothy saw Eleanor, her face went pale with shock. Her eyes widened. Her hand flew to her mouth. For a moment, she seemed frozen in place, unable to believe what she was seeing. But she recovered quickly. Her professional composure snapped into place like a mask. She glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then gestured urgently. "This way," she said briskly, leading them down a hallway to a small room used by the hospital staff for breaks. Once the door was closed behind them, she embraced Eleanor tightly. "My God, Ellie. Everyone thinks you are either dead or on the run. The newspapers have been full of it. Your face is on posters all over the city." "I nearly was dead," Eleanor replied grimly. She quickly introduced Sam and explained their situation, keeping her voice low despite the privacy of the room. She told Dorothy everything: the embezzlement, the murder she witnessed, the frame, the beating, the rescue. Dorothy listened intently, her expression growing darker with each detail. When Eleanor finished, the nurse shook her head slowly. "I knew something was wrong when they claimed you killed Silas. You could not hurt a fly. I told everyone who would listen that there must be some mistake, but no one wanted to hear it." She glanced at Sam. "And you have been protecting her all this time." "Just lending a hand," Sam replied modestly. Dorothy assessed him with a nurse's perceptive eye, taking in his steady demeanor, his protective stance, the way he positioned himself between Eleanor and the door. She seemed to approve of what she saw. "Well, she is lucky you found her." She turned back to Eleanor. "What do you need from me?" "A place to stay tonight," Eleanor said, "and help retrieving something I hid, the evidence that can prove my innocence. My apartment is small, but you are both welcome." Dorothy did not hesitate. "As for the hiding place, where is it?" Eleanor hesitated, then leaned closer, dropping her voice to barely above a whisper. "The cathedral, in the third confessional." Sam raised an eyebrow. "You hid stolen bank records in a church, not stolen," Eleanor corrected. "Copied, and it seemed the safest place at the time. No one would think to look there. I knew the priest's schedule. I tucked the documents behind a loose panel in the wooden frame of the confessional. They should still be there." "The cathedral opens at dawn for morning mass," Dorothy said. "We can go then when there are plenty of other worshippers around to provide cover. You will be just another face in the crowd." That night, they stayed in Dorothy's small apartment on the third floor of a modest boarding house. Sam insisted on sleeping on the floor, giving the two women the bed. Neither of them objected. The apartment was cramped and the floor was hard, but none of them slept well regardless. They were too keyed up with anticipation and worry about what the morning would bring. Eleanor lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the city outside. Carriages passing on the street below. A dog barking somewhere in the distance. The murmur of voices from neighboring apartments. And beside her, Dorothy's even breathing as her friend slipped into exhausted sleep. But Eleanor could not sleep. Her mind raced with possibilities, most of them terrible. What if the evidence was no longer there? What if someone had found it? What if Holloway was watching the cathedral? What if they walked into a trap? You cannot sleep. Sam's voice came softly from the darkness, barely louder than a whisper. You either, she replied just as quietly. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. I know. She paused, gathering her courage. Sam, yeah, thank you for everything. For believing me when you had every reason not to. For coming with me when you could have stayed safe at the ranch. For risking your life for a woman you barely know. There was a rustle as he shifted position on the hard floor. I know you well enough, Ellie. I know you are brave and stubborn and too honest for your own good. I know you would rather die than let innocent people suffer. I know that when you smile, it is like the sun coming out after a storm. He paused. That is enough. She felt tears prick her eyes at his words. Felt something warm bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. Get some sleep, he said. I'll be right here if you need me. And somehow knowing that he was there within arm's reach if she needed him, allowed Eleanor to finally relax. Her eyes grew heavy, her breathing slowed, and she drifted into a fitful sleep. Her dreams filled with shadows and danger, but also with a tall, steady figure who always appeared just when she needed him most. Before dawn, they set out for the cathedral. The streets were quiet at this hour, occupied only by early workers making their way to jobs in the warehouses and factories. Bakers fired up their ovens, milkmen made their rounds. The city was slowly waking, stretching and yawning after its brief rest. The massive doors of Sacramento Cathedral were already open when they arrived. Warm lights spilled onto the stone steps, beckoning the faithful inside. The bells had not yet rung for morning mass, but already a handful of parishioners knelt in the pews for early prayers. Inside, the smell of incense hung in the air, sweet and heavy. Candles flickered in alcoves along the walls, casting dancing shadows on the stone. Stained glass windows glowed with the first rays of the rising sun. It was peaceful and serene, a sanctuary from the dangers of the world outside. A stark contrast to the danger that Eleanor knew lurked somewhere in the city. She led Sam and Dorothy toward the row of confessional booths along the side wall. The wooden structures stood like sentinels, their velvet curtains partially drawn. They had heard countless confessions over the years. Countless sins. Countless pleas for forgiveness. Today they would hopefully give up a different kind of secret. As they approached, Eleanor's steps faltered. What is it? Sam whispered, immediately alert. There is someone in there. She nodded toward a man just exiting the middle confessional. He was middle-aged, unremarkable, wearing the clothes of a shopkeeper or cleric. Sam's hand moved instinctively to the gun concealed beneath his coat. Do you recognize him? Eleanor squinted, studying the man's face, his posture, his movements. No, she said finally, relaxing slightly. Just a worshiper, I think. Just someone seeking absolution for his sins. They waited until the man had left the cathedral, watching him walk down the center aisle and out into the morning light. Only then did Eleanor slip into the third confessional booth. Her heart pounded as she knelt in the small space. The wood was worn smooth by countless knees. The air smelled of old wood and candle wax. Through the lattice screen, she could see the empty space where a priest would normally sit. Her fingers found the loose section of the wooden panel at knee level. She pried it open, feeling the wood give way with a soft creak. She reached into the dark space behind it, her fingers searching for the leather portfolio she had hidden there just over a week ago. The portfolio that contained everything. The copied ledgers, the letters between Thornton and Holloway, the evidence that would prove her innocence and send a murderer to prison. Her fingers found nothing but dust and empty space. Her face fell. It is gone. Sam crowded into the small space beside her, his broad shoulders barely fitting through the narrow entrance. Are you sure this is the right place? Positive. Panic edged into her voice. I put it right here, behind this panel. I remember every detail. This is where I hid it. Someone found it. Someone took it. A shadow fell across the confessional entrance, and a cold voice cut through the silence. Looking for this Miss Whitmore. They turned to find a man in his 50s standing in the doorway of the confessional. He was dressed in the dark suit of a banker, expensive and well-tailored. His silver hair was combed back from a high forehead. His eyes were cold, calculating, completely devoid of warmth or mercy. He held a leather portfolio in one hand. Two younger men flanked him, their stances making clear they were not there to pray. They wore the rough clothes of hired muscle, and their hands rested near the bulges beneath their coats, where weapons were obviously concealed. Holloway. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. The name came out like a curse, like a prayer, like the identification of death itself. Marcus Holloway smiled, and the expression held no warmth at all. It was the smile of a predator who had finally cornered his prey, the smile of a man who enjoyed causing pain. "You are more resilient than I gave you credit for," he said. "My associates assured me you would not survive your lesson on that roadside. Clearly, I need better help." He looked at the two men beside him with obvious contempt. "Though I suppose they did succeed in driving you out of the city, and now here you are walking right back into my hands. How convenient." Sam moved immediately, positioning himself between Eleanor and the three men blocking the confessional entrance. His hand rested on the grip of his revolver, though he had not yet drawn it. "You must be the Good Samaritan." Holloway observed his cold eyes, taking in Sam's defensive stance. "The cowboy who took in to stray. Unfortunate for you that your charity has landed you in such an uncomfortable position." "And you must be the snake who beats women and frames them for murder," Sam replied evenly. "I have been wanting to meet you." Holloway's smile widened, though it never reached his eyes. How touching. A genuine frontier hero. "Tell me, do you know what she is accused of? Murder, theft, conspiracy? You have been harboring a wanted criminal." "I have been protecting an innocent woman from a killer," Sam corrected. "And looking at you now, I can see I was right." From behind Sam, Eleanor found her voice. "How did you find the documents?" Holloway held up the leather portfolio, tapping it with his free hand. "You think I would not watch the places meaningful to you? I had men observing this cathedral for days after your disappearance. Every church you had ever attended, every friend you might contact, every place you might try to hide something important." He chuckled, clearly pleased with his own cleverness. "Eventually, one of my men noticed the loose panel during a confession. Imagine my surprise at finding such detailed evidence of poor Silas's misdeeds. And my own. You were quite thorough, Miss Whitmore. I almost admire your dedication." "There are copies," Eleanor bluffed, stepping forward to stand beside Sam. "I sent them to the federal marshal before I fled the city." "A valiant attempt, my dear." Holloway shook his head. "But if that were true, I would be in custody already. No, I think this portfolio contains the only evidence of my involvement. And once you are silenced permanently, there will be no one left to contradict the official story." He gestured to his men. "Now I think we should take this conversation somewhere more private. The three of you will come with us quietly, or my associates will create a scene that ends badly for everyone. Starting with your frontier hero here." Sam's hand tightened on his gun. The church was not empty. Other worshippers were scattered throughout the pews, some beginning to notice the tense confrontation near the confessionals. An elderly woman looked up from her prayers with concern. A young mother pulled her children closer. If shooting started, innocent people could be hurt. But Sam was not about to walk meekly into Holloway's trap either. He had seen what the man did to people who crossed him. He had seen Eleanor's battered body. He knew that going quietly meant dying slowly, probably painfully, in some hidden location where their screams would never be heard. Before he could decide on a course of action, Dorothy's voice rang out from behind Holloway. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" Holloway turned, momentarily distracted by the unexpected interruption. Dorothy stood in the aisle between the pews, her nurse's uniform lending her an air of authority. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were alert and sharp. She held a heavy candlestick in one hand, not quite concealed by the folds of her skirt. In that instant of distraction, Sam acted. He lunged forward, grabbing the leather portfolio from Holloway's hand with one swift motion. At the same time, he shoved Eleanor toward Dorothy. "Run!" Holloway stumbled backward into his men, cursing. Sam drew his revolver and fired a single shot into the ceiling. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space of the cathedral. Plaster rained down. Women screamed. The peaceful sanctuary erupted into chaos. Screams echoed off the stone walls as worshippers scrambled for cover. People dove beneath pews and rushed toward the exits. The elderly woman fell to her knees, praying loudly. Children cried. Someone knocked over a rack of candles, sending flames licking across the stone floor. Holloway's men reached for their weapons, but the sudden panic created confusion and blocked their lines of fire. They could not shoot without hitting innocent bystanders. They could not move without fighting against the tide of fleeing worshippers. Sam backed toward the side exit, keeping his gun trained on Holloway. "Go!" he shouted to Eleanor and Dorothy. "I am right behind you." The two women ran. Eleanor's healing ribs protested with every stride, sharp pains stabbing through her side. But she ignored it, pushed through it, let adrenaline carry her forward. Dorothy grabbed her hand and pulled her through a side door into a narrow corridor that led to the priest's chambers. Behind them, one of Holloway's men finally got a clear shot and fired. The bullet splintered the wooden frame of a confessional inches from Sam's head. Wood fragments stung his cheek. He felt blood running down his face. Sam returned fire, catching the man in the shoulder and spinning him to the ground. The man screamed, clutching his wound. His partner hesitated for a crucial moment, unsure whether to help his fallen companion or continue the pursuit. Sam used that hesitation to make his escape. He burst through the side door, portfolio clutched tightly under his arm, and found Eleanor and Dorothy waiting in the alley outside. Their faces were pale with fear, but set with determination. "Move," Sam urged, grabbing Eleanor's hand. "They are right behind us." They ran, through the narrow passages between buildings, away from the main streets where they might be easily spotted. The alley was dim and smelled of garbage and rotting vegetables. Rats scattered at their approach. Laundry hung overhead, dripping onto the cobblestones. Behind them, shouts and gunfire echoed from the cathedral as Holloway's men gave chase. Sam could hear Holloway's voice barking orders, directing his men to spread out to cover the exits to find them at any cost. The sheriff's office, Eleanor gasped as they ran. "It is our only chance, too far," Dorothy countered. "And the sheriff is in Holloway's pocket. Half the city council is. He has been paying them off for years. Then, where the newspaper?" Dorothy pulled them around a corner, pressing against the wall as two men ran past without seeing them. "My cousin Thomas works at the Sacramento Gazette. He is honest and he hates corruption. If we can get the story out, Holloway will not be able to silence us all." They changed direction, weaving through back streets toward the newspaper office. Eleanor's breath came in ragged gasps. Her ribs screamed with every step. The world narrowed to the pounding of her heart and the burning in her lungs, but she forced herself to keep moving. They had come too far to fail now. They had the evidence. They just had to get it to someone who could use it. The Sacramento Gazette occupied a narrow building squeezed between a dry goods store and a law office. The sign above the door proclaimed it the voice of truth in the capital city. The windows were grimy with ink dust, and the door was propped open to let in the morning air. Dorothy burst through the front door, startling the few reporters present at that early hour. Men in shirt sleeves and ink-stained aprons looked up from their desks, pens frozen in mid-sentence. "Thomas," Dorothy called. "Thomas, come quickly." A wiry man with ink-stained fingers emerged from a back room. His spectacles were pushed up on his forehead, and his shirt sleeves were rolled past his elbows. He looked like he had not slept in days. "Dorothy, what in blazes?" No time to explain. Dorothy pushed Eleanor and Sam ahead of her into the building. "These people need protection and a platform." "It is about the Thornton murder." Thomas's expression sharpened. The fatigue vanished from his eyes, replaced by the keen interest of a journalist scenting a story. "The bank murder. You know something about it?" Sam thrust the portfolio forward. "We know everything about it, and we have proof that the real killer is Marcus Holloway, who is currently trying to silence us permanently." Thomas took the portfolio and began flipping through the documents inside. His eyes widened as he scanned the pages. Ledgers with damning entries, letters discussing the embezzlement scheme, names, dates, amounts, a complete record of years of theft. "Good Lord," he murmured. "This is incredible." "It proves Holloway and Thornton were embezzling together," Eleanor explained quickly, the words tumbling out. "When I discovered it, Thornton tried to silence me. Holloway killed him to take over the operation and framed me for the murder. Everything points to me because he arranged it that way." Outside shouts became audible, angry voices growing closer. Thomas moved to the window and peered through the grimy glass. "We have company," he announced. "Holloway and at least 4 men. They are heading this way." "Is there a back door?" Sam asked. Thomas nodded. "Through the press room, but they will have the alley covered in minutes. Then we need to move now." Dorothy grabbed Eleanor's arm. "The telegraph office. Bill Watkins runs it. He is honest. We can wire the federal marshal in San Francisco and get the story out at the same time." Thomas was already moving toward the back of the building, portfolio in hand. I will set the presses running. Even if Holloway gets to us, the story will print in tomorrow morning's edition. Every person in Sacramento will know the truth. He will not be able to bury it then. He paused at the doorway to the press room. Go, get to Watkins. I will buy you as much time as I can. They slipped out the back door just as Holloway's men entered through the front. The alley was narrow and dim, smelling of ink and garbage. Wooden crates were stacked against the walls. A stray cat hissed at them and disappeared into the shadows. Dorothy led the way, navigating the maze of passages with the confidence of someone who had grown up in this city. She knew every shortcut, every hidden path, every gap between buildings that could serve as an escape route. 3 blocks, she whispered. Just 3 more blocks. They moved as quickly as stealth allowed, pressing into doorways and shadows whenever footsteps approached. Twice, they barely avoided Holloway's men, who were spreading through the area in a methodical search pattern. Once, they had to double back when they found an alley blocked by crates and debris. Finally, the telegraph office came into view, a small building with a sign proclaiming Western Union Telegraph in faded letters. The door stood open, and through the window, they could see a portly man hunched over his equipment, tapping out messages in Morse code. Almost there, Dorothy breathed, and then Holloway stepped out of a side alley. His revolver was raised, aimed directly at Eleanor's heart. His silver hair was disheveled now, his expensive suit rumpled and dirty. There was a scratch on his cheek, probably from the chaos in the cathedral. His cold eyes blazed with fury. That is far enough. Sam moved to draw his gun, but Holloway shook his head. I would not, Cowboy. My men have you surrounded. One wrong move and you all die right here in the street. Sam's jaw tightened, but he lowered his hand. Holloway was not bluffing. Men were emerging from doorways and alleys, forming a loose circle around them. At least 5 guns were pointed in their direction. There was no escape. The portfolio, Holloway demanded. Where is it gone? Eleanor said, lifting her chin defiantly. On its way to the presses. Tomorrow morning, every person in Sacramento will know what you did. Something flickered in Holloway's eyes. Fear quickly masked. You are bluffing. Am I? She met his gaze squarely, refusing to show the terror that coiled in her stomach. The Gazette has the documents right now. Even if you kill us, the story comes out. Your name will be on every front page in California. You will be finished. For a long moment, no one moved. Holloway's expression shifted as he calculated his options. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant sounds of the city waking up around them. Then the door of the telegraph office opened, and a voice called out, What is going on out here? Bill Watkins stood in the doorway, his round face creased with concern. He was a small man with thinning hair and ink-stained fingers, clearly not a threat to anyone. Holloway's men tensed, but the telegraph operator was obviously unarmed and posed no danger. Holloway, Dorothy said loudly, her voice carrying in the early morning quiet. Marcus Holloway, who killed Silas Thornton and framed this innocent woman for the crime. We have evidence, and it is already at the newspaper. More people were appearing now, drawn by the commotion. Shopkeepers opening their doors, workers pausing on their way to jobs. A small crowd gathering at a safe distance, watching the confrontation unfold. Witnesses, too many witnesses. Shoot them. Holloway ordered his men, desperation creeping into his voice. Shoot them all. But the men hesitated. Killing fugitives in a dark alley was one thing. Murdering people in broad daylight with witnesses watching was another entirely. They were hired muscle, not fanatics. They were not willing to hang for Holloway's crimes. I said, shoot them. A new voice cut through the tension, authoritative and commanding. Holloway, this is Sheriff Dawson. Stand down and disperse immediately. The crowd parted to reveal the sheriff and 4 deputies, all armed and advancing toward Holloway's position. Dawson's face was grim, his eyes fixed on the banker. Sheriff Holloway said smoothly, attempting to regain control of the situation. I am pursuing a wanted fugitive. This woman is accused of murder and theft. So I have heard. Dawson did not lower his weapon. Convenient how the only witness to Thornton's embezzlement ended up accused of killing him. He held up a paper that Sam had not noticed him carrying. Just got an interesting telegram from Judge Ashford. Seems he received some very concerning financial records this morning. Records that implicate you in Fraud Holloway. Murder, embezzlement, conspiracy, Thomas. Sam realized what had happened. The newspaper man had outplayed Holloway at his own game. While Holloway was chasing them through the streets, Thomas Brennan had been sending copies of the evidence to the one person in Sacramento with enough power and integrity to act on it. "This is absurd," Holloway sputtered. "You cannot possibly believe the ravings of a wanted criminal over a respected businessman." "I believe what I see," Sheriff Dawson said flatly. "I see a woman who was beaten half to death and left on a roadside. I see armed men cornering unarmed citizens in the street. I see documents that link you to embezzlement and conspiracy." He gestured to his deputies. "Take him and his men into custody for suspicion of murder fraud, embezzlement, and attempted murder." For a tense moment, it seemed Holloway might resist. His hand twitched toward his gun. His men looked to him for direction. The crowd held its breath. But the deputies had the advantage of numbers and position, and the crowd of witnesses made any violent action suicidal. Slowly, reluctantly, Holloway allowed himself to be disarmed and restrained. His men followed suit, their faces showing a mix of fear and resignation. As the deputies led them away, Sheriff Dawson approached Eleanor and Sam. "Miss Whitmore," he said. His tone was considerably warmer than it had been a moment before. "I believe I owe you an apology. When those wanted posters arrived, I took them at face value. I should have dug deeper." "You believed what you were told?" Eleanor replied. Holloway went to great lengths to make his story convincing. "Even so," Dawson shook his head. "Judge Ashford wants to speak with you as soon as possible. He has read the documents and believes your innocence can be established. Until then, you are under his protection." Eleanor felt her knees go weak with relief. It was over. Holloway was in custody. The evidence was in the hands of the authorities. The nightmare that had consumed her life for the past 2 weeks was finally ending. She felt Sam's arms slip around her waist, steadying her, holding her up when her own strength threatened to fail. "You did it," he said quietly. "You won." "We did it," she corrected, looking up at him with tears in her eyes. "I could not have done any of this without you." The morning sun was rising over Sacramento, bathing the city in golden light. The crowd was dispersing, people returning to their daily lives with a story to tell their families over dinner. And somewhere in the distance, a church bell was ringing, calling the faithful to prayer. But for Eleanor Whitmore, standing in the street with the man who had saved her life, the sound was something else entirely. It was the sound of a new beginning, the sound of justice served, the sound of hope. The next 24 hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Judge William Ashford was a stern but fair man in his 60s with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look straight through anyone who stood before him. He had served on the bench for over 20 years and had a reputation for integrity that even Holloway's money could not corrupt. He reviewed the evidence personally, spending hours poring over the documents that Thomas Brennan had delivered to his chambers. Federal marshals arrived from San Francisco on the evening train, grim-faced men with badges on their chests and warrants in their pockets. Holloway and his associates were held without bail in the Sacramento City Jail, their expensive lawyers unable to secure their release. And one by one, the full scope of their crimes came to light. The evidence Eleanor had gathered was more comprehensive than even she had realized. The documents included not just records of embezzlement, but correspondence between Holloway and Thornton, discussing their schemes in explicit detail. They revealed that Holloway had been the mastermind all along, manipulating his partner and planning to eventually take over the entire operation. When Thornton became a liability, when he grew nervous and talked about confessing, Holloway eliminated him. Framing Eleanor had been an afterthought, a convenient way to deflect suspicion and eliminate a witness at the same time. "You were remarkably thorough," Judge Ashford told Eleanor during their meeting the following afternoon. His chambers were lined with law books and smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. "Most people in your position would have been too frightened to document anything. Your attention to detail may have saved your life." "I had to be certain," Eleanor replied. She sat in a leather chair across from the judge's massive desk, Sam beside her. She was still wearing the same dress she had fled in, now wrinkled and stained, but she held herself with quiet dignity. "I knew no one would believe a woman's word against a respected banker without irrefutable proof. I had to have evidence that could not be denied or explained away." The judge nodded approvingly. "Well, you have that proof. The federal marshals have enough to charge Holloway with murder, fraud, embezzlement, and attempted murder. He will spend the rest of his life in prison, assuming he is not hanged. Standing beside Eleanor, Sam felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The danger was over. Holloway could no longer threaten her. The nightmare that had begun on a dusty road outside Weaverville was finally ending. There is one more matter. Judge Ashford continued, shuffling through papers on his desk. The bank's board of directors has been in contact with me. They are eager to avoid a public lawsuit and have authorized a settlement. $5,000 as restitution for your ordeal. He smiled slightly, the expression softening his stern features. Ironically, the same amount you were accused of stealing. They have also extended an offer to return to your position at the bank, should you wish it. Eleanor blinked in surprise. That is very generous. It is the least they can do, the judge said bluntly. Their negligence allowed Holloway and Thornton to operate for years. They should be grateful you are not pursuing them in court. I suspect a jury would award you considerably more if you chose to press the matter. When they left the judge's chambers, Sam took Eleanor's hand as they walked down the courthouse steps. The afternoon sun bathed Sacramento in golden light, and for the first time since they had arrived, the city felt welcoming rather than threatening. The streets that had seemed full of danger now seemed full of possibility. The people passing by were no longer potential enemies, but simply citizens going about their lives. The weight of fear that Eleanor had carried for weeks was finally lifting from her shoulders. $5,000, Sam said. That is enough to start over anywhere you want. You could go anywhere, do anything, build any life you choose. Eleanor stopped walking and turned to face him. Is that what you want, for me to start over somewhere? His grip on her hand tightened. What I want, he said, slowly choosing his words carefully, is for you to be happy and safe. Whatever that looks like, wherever that takes you. She searched his face looking for something. Permission, perhaps, or courage. And if what makes me happy is a quiet life on a ranch in the hills above Waverville. Sam's heart stuttered in his chest. Is that what you want? These past weeks, she said quietly, despite the danger. Despite everything, I have felt more alive than I have in years. And I think you have something to do with that, Eleanor. Let me finish. She squeezed his hand. When I was lying on that roadside, certain I was going to die, I made myself a promise. I promised that if I survived, I would not waste time on hesitation or fear. I would live fully, love boldly, and never again let important words go unspoken. She took a breath, steadying herself. I have come to care for you, Sam Crawford. More than I can properly express. More than might be one, given how short a time we have known each other. But I have learned that wisdom is not always the same as truth. And the truth is that you have become important to me. Sam was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly a smile spread across his face. It was the most open, genuine smile she had ever seen from him. It transformed his weathered features, making him look younger, lighter, as if a burden he had carried for years was finally being set down. You know, he said, I have never been much good with words. Always preferred to let actions speak. But I suppose there are some things that need saying out loud. He drew her closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face. His palm was warm and calloused against her cheek, rough from years of hard work, but infinitely gentle. I think I started falling for you the moment you opened your eyes on that dusty road and asked me for water. He admitted, every day since then has only made it worse. Or better, depending on how you look at it. So what do we do about it? Well, he said thoughtfully, a hint of humor entering his voice. I have a ranch that could use a woman's touch. And you have a settlement that could help expand operations. Seems like there might be an arrangement that benefits us both. Eleanor laughed, the sound bright and free. It was the first time she had truly laughed since before the nightmare began. The sound seemed to surprise even her. Sam Crawford, are you proposing a business partnership? Among other things, he replied, grinning, though I was hoping the partnership might include something a bit more permanent eventually, if you are interested. She answered by rising onto her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was brief but full of promise. His lips were warm against hers, gentle but firm. The world seemed to fall away around them. The noise of the city faded. The people passing by ceased to exist. There was only this moment, this connection, this beginning. When she pulled away, they were both smiling. I think that can be arranged, she said. They spent one more day in Sacramento, tying up loose ends and saying goodbye to Dorothy. The nurse embraced Eleanor tightly on the platform of the train station, tears streaming down her face. "You write to me," Dorothy instructed, her voice thick with emotion. "Every month. I want to know everything that happens. Every detail, every tree, every sorrow." "I promise," Eleanor assured her. "And you must come visit. The ranch is beautiful this time of year. The wildflowers are blooming and the mountains are green." Dorothy glanced at Sam, who was loading their bags into the train car. "He is a good man," she said quietly so only Eleanor could hear. "Hold on to him. I intend to." The journey back to Weaverville was different from the trip out. Instead of tension and fear, there was anticipation and hope. Instead of watching for enemies around every corner, they watched the landscape roll by and talked about the future they would build together. Sam and Eleanor talked for hours, sharing stories from their pasts and making plans for their future. She told him about her childhood, about her mother's strength and her father's early death. He told her about the war, about the things he had seen and done, about the nightmares that still sometimes woke him in the darkness. They talked about the settlement money and what it could accomplish. Half would go toward purchasing additional cattle and improving the ranch's irrigation system. The other half would go toward expanding the main house, adding a second bedroom, and enlarging the kitchen to Mrs. Foster's exacting specifications. Eleanor's experience with banking would help manage the finances. Her sharp mind for numbers would ensure they never overspent or missed an opportunity. And together they would build something lasting on the California frontier. When Pinewood Ranch finally came into view, Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. The two-story farmhouse with its wide porch, the big barn with its doors standing open, the pastures where cattle graze peacefully, the mountains rising in the distance, their peaks touched with gold by the setting sun. "It feels like coming home," she said softly, "though I have never really been here before. Not properly." Sam pulled the carriage to a stop and turned to look at her. "It is home," he said simply, "if you want it to be." She reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "I do." Mrs. Foster was waiting on the porch when they arrived. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back in its usual tight bun, and her apron was dusted with flour from whatever she had been baking. Her face was a mixture of curiosity and concern as she watched them approach. But when she saw the way Sam looked at Eleanor, her expression transformed into a knowing smile. The worry lines around her eyes softened. The set of her mouth relaxed. "About time you brought someone home, Mr. Crawford," she said approvingly. "This place has been too quiet for too long." Eleanor smiled at the housekeeper. "I hope you do not mind the intrusion, Mrs. Foster." "Mind?" The older woman snorted. "I have been praying for this day since I started working here 4 years ago. This man has been alone too long. It is not natural." She bustled forward to help with the bags. "Now come inside, both of you. You must be exhausted and dinner is almost ready." As they walked through the front door, Sam's hand warm in hers, Eleanor allowed herself to truly believe that the nightmare was over. Holloway was in custody, her name was cleared, and a new chapter of her life was beginning. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in months, she was eager to find out. 6 months had passed since Eleanor Whitmore arrived at Pinewood Ranch. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning, with Mrs. Foster, Liam, Dorothy, and Judge Ashford as witnesses. The ceremony was simple, held on the ranch property beneath a spreading oak tree that Sam's mother had planted years before. Eleanor wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Foster had helped her sew, working together in the evenings by lamplight, stitching and fitting and adjusting until it was perfect. Sam looked handsomely uncomfortable in a suit that was clearly saved for special occasions, tugging at his collar and shifting his weight from foot to foot. But when he looked at Eleanor walking toward him through the golden autumn light, all his discomfort vanished. There was only her, only this moment, only the beginning of the rest of their lives. Their vows were brief but heartfelt. Eleanor promised to stand beside Sam through whatever challenges the frontier might bring, to be his partner in all things, to love him in good times and bad, in sickness and health, for as long as they both lived. Sam promised to love and protect her for the rest of his days, to be worthy of the trust she placed in him, to build with her a life filled with awe and purpose and meaning. When they kissed to seal the marriage, Mrs. Foster dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "About time," she muttered, though she was smiling broadly. The settlement money from the bank proved to be a wise investment. Sam used half to purchase additional cattle and improve the ranch's irrigation system, bringing water to fields that had been dry and unproductive. The other half went toward expanding the main house, adding a second bedroom, and enlarging the kitchen to Mrs. Foster's exacting specifications. Eleanor threw herself into ranch life with the same determination she had once applied to banking. She kept the books balancing income against expenses and identifying ways to improve efficiency. Her sharp mind for numbers proved invaluable, and within 3 months, Pinewood Ranch was operating more profitably than ever before. But her contributions went beyond finances. Eleanor had a gift for dealing with people, a warmth and directness that put strangers at ease. When Sam was hesitant to negotiate prices with buyers, Eleanor stepped in and secured deals that exceeded his expectations. When neighboring ranchers needed advice on record keeping, she offered her expertise freely. "You have changed things around here," Sam told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset behind the mountains. "For the better. We changed things together," Eleanor corrected, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I could not have done any of this without you." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "I was just thinking the same thing about you." The first year of marriage brought its share of challenges. A drought in late summer threatened the water supply, forcing them to dig new wells and ration carefully. A sickness swept through the cattle herd, requiring round-the-clock care for 2 weeks. Sam barely slept, moving from animal to animal, doing everything he could to save them. And there were occasional reminders of the past. One afternoon, a traveler rode through the ranch, asking questions about a woman who had been wanted for murder in Sacramento. He was a bounty hunter following up on old leads that had never been properly closed. Sam met him at the gate with a shotgun over his arm and a hard look in his eye. "There is no fugitive here," he said flatly. "The woman you are looking for was cleared of all charges 6 months ago. You can check with Judge Ashford in Sacramento if you do not believe me." The bounty hunter studied Sam's face for a long moment, assessing whether he was telling the truth or bluffing. Whatever he saw must have convinced him, because he tipped his hat and rode away without causing trouble. But the incident reminded them both that the past was never truly gone. "Does it bother you?" Eleanor asked that night as they lay in bed. "What people might think about me?" Sam gathered her close, his arms strong and warm around her. "What bothers me is that anyone could still believe you were guilty after everything that came out at the trial. Holloway confessed to the murder, for God's sake. The evidence was overwhelming. Some people believe what they want to believe. Then those people can go hang," he said firmly. "I know who you are, Eleanor Crawford, and I am proud to have you as my wife." The use of her married name still gave her a little thrill, even after all these months. Eleanor Crawford. It sounded right somehow, like it had always been meant to be. Spring arrived with wildflowers blooming across the hills and new calves being born in the pastures. The ranch was alive with new life. Colts frolicked in the paddock. Chicks hatched in the henhouse. And Eleanor discovered she was pregnant on a morning in April when Mrs. Foster noticed her turning green at the smell of frying bacon. The housekeeper's eyes widened with understanding. "Child, are you in a family way?" Eleanor's hand went instinctively to her stomach. "I think I might be." Mrs. Foster let out a whoop of joy that brought Sam running from the barn, convinced something was wrong. He burst through the door with his shirt half buttoned and hay in his hair, ready to fight whatever threat had caused such a commotion. When he learned the truth, he stood frozen for a full minute. His face went through a dozen expressions: shock, disbelief, wonder, and finally a joy so profound it seemed to light him from within. "A baby," he kept saying, his face split by the widest grin she had ever seen. "We are having a baby." He swept Eleanor into his arms and spun her around until she was dizzy and laughing and demanding he put her down before she was sick. The pregnancy proceeded smoothly, thanks in large part to Mrs. Foster's careful attention and Dorothy's occasional advice sent by letter from Sacramento. Eleanor continued to work on the ranch books well into her 7th month, only relenting when Sam physically removed the ledgers from her hands. "You need to rest," he insisted. "The numbers will still be there after the baby comes." "I hate feeling useless," she complained. "Growing our child is not useless, Eleanor. It is the most important thing you could possibly be doing." She could not argue with that. Their son arrived in January on the coldest night of the year. The labor was long and difficult, stretching through the afternoon and into the evening, and then through most of the night. Sam paced the parlor for hours, wearing a path in the rug, driving Mrs. Foster to distraction with his nervous energy. Every cry of pain from the bedroom made him flinch. Every silence made him fear the worst. He had faced enemy fire without flinching, but this was infinitely harder. This was waiting. This was helplessness. This was knowing that the woman he loved was suffering and there was nothing he could do to help. When the baby's cry finally echoed through the house, he burst into the bedroom without waiting for permission. Eleanor lay exhausted but radiant against the pillows, a small bundle cradled in her arms. Her hair was damp with sweat, and there were dark circles under her eyes. But she had never looked more beautiful to Sam. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Sam approached the bed on the unsteady legs. He had faced down outlaws and survived a war, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. For the tiny face peeking out from the blanket, for the perfect little fingers curled into fists, for the overwhelming love that crashed over him like a wave. "He is perfect," he whispered. They named him William after Sam's father. He had his mother's honey blonde hair and his father's stubborn chin. And from his first breath, he had both of them wrapped around his tiny finger. The second year of marriage brought prosperity and expansion. Pinewood Ranch was now one of the most successful operations in the territory, and Sam had begun talking about purchasing the adjacent property to increase their holdings. The herd had doubled. The barn had been rebuilt larger than before, and the farmhouse was full of the sounds of family. But for Eleanor, the greatest riches could not be measured in dollars or acres. They were measured in quiet evenings on the porch with Sam, in William's first steps across the parlor floor, in Mrs. Foster's laughter echoing through the kitchen. She had everything she had ever wanted, more than she had ever dared to dream. One evening, as she sat nursing William in the rocking chair Sam had built especially for her, she reflected on how far she had come. 2 years ago, she had been lying on a dusty road, beaten and left for dead. Today, she was surrounded by love and safety and family. "What are you thinking about?" Sam asked, settling into the chair beside her. "How lucky I am," she replied honestly. "How strange it is that the worst moment of my life led me to the best." He reached over to stroke William's downy head. "I think about that sometimes, too. What would have happened if I had taken a different route that day? If I had not seen you on the trail, you would have found someone else," Eleanor said. "Some other woman to give you gray hairs." Sam shook his head. "There is no other woman for me. There never was and never will be. You are my heart, Eleanor Crawford. You and this little one. Everything I do for you." She leaned over to kiss him, careful not to disturb the nursing baby. "And I for you." Outside, the sun was setting over Pinewood Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The cattle were settling in for the night. Mrs. Foster was preparing dinner in the kitchen, and somewhere in Sacramento, Marcus Holloway was serving the 27th month of his life sentence, forgotten by the world he had tried so hard to manipulate. Justice had been served. Love had won, and Eleanor Crawford, once left for dead on a lonely California road, had found her happily ever after. 3 years into their marriage, Eleanor received news that stirred up memories she had tried to bury. Marcus Holloway was dead. The letter came from the warden of San Quentin prison informing her, as a victim of Holloway's crimes, that the convicted murderer had succumbed to pneumonia in his cell. The funeral, such as it was, had already taken place. No family members had claimed the body. He had been buried in the prison cemetery, his grave marked only by a number. Eleanor read the letter twice before setting it aside. She was not sure what she felt. Relief, certainly, but also something more complicated. A sadness for a life wasted on greed and cruelty. A strange emptiness where fear had once lived. "What is it?" Sam asked, noticing her expression. "Holloway is dead." She handed him the letter. "Pneumonia, the warden says." Sam scanned the page, then set it down. "Good riddance." Eleanor nodded slowly. "I suppose so. It just feels strange knowing he is gone. Like closing a book I had forgotten was still open." That night, she dreamed of the dusty road where Sam had found her. She was lying in the dirt again, bleeding and broken, watching the sky spin above her. But this time, instead of Holloway's face looming over her, she saw Sam's hand reaching down. She took it, and he pulled her to her feet, and together they walked into the sunshine. She woke with tears on her cheeks and the certainty that some chapters, no matter how painful, were necessary parts of the story. The following months brought more changes to Pinewood Ranch. Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again, and Mrs. Foster immediately went into a flurry of preparation. William, now 2 years old, was delighted by the news, though he did not entirely understand what a baby sister or brother would mean. This time, the pregnancy brought twins. Emma and Grace arrived on a stormy night in November, their cries competing with the thunder outside. Two perfect little girls with their father's dark hair and their mother's determined spirit. Sam looked at his three children and wondered how he had ever thought his life was complete before Eleanor arrived. "I never imagined any of this," he admitted one evening, holding Grace while Eleanor nursed Emma. A wife, children, a full house. He shook his head in wonder. "5 years ago, I was convinced I would live alone until I died." "What changed your mind, you?" he said simply. "You changed everything." The years that followed were busy ones. William grew from a toddler to a young boy, showing his father's skill with horses and his mother's head for numbers. Emma and Grace were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into mischief together. Pinewood Ranch expanded twice more, becoming one of the largest operations in the region. Sam hired additional hands to manage the workload, and Eleanor found herself acting as an unofficial accountant for several neighboring ranches. "You should open a proper business," Dorothy suggested during one of her visits from Sacramento. "A bookkeeping service for the local ranchers. You would make a fortune." Eleanor laughed. "I have enough fortune. What I want is time with my family." And time was what she got. Long days teaching William to ride. Afternoons picking wildflowers with the twins. Evenings on the porch with Sam, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. There were challenges, of course. A harsh winter that killed half the cattle. A fire in the barn that required months of rebuilding. William's broken arm after a fall from a horse. Emma's frightening bout with scarlet fever that kept them all awake with worry for 2 weeks. But they faced each challenge together. And each challenge made them stronger. On their 10th anniversary, Sam surprised Eleanor with a gift. It was a leather-bound journal thick with pages covered in his careful handwriting. "What is this?" she asked, turning it over in her hands. "Our story," he replied. "I had Dorothy help me gather the newspaper accounts from the trial, the court records, even some of your notes." He shifted uncomfortably. "I thought our children should know someday. Not just how we met, but what you overcame." Eleanor opened the journal and began to read. There were articles from the Sacramento Gazette detailing Holloway's arrest and trial, court documents listing the charges against him, even the original wanted poster that had named her as a murderer. And interwoven with all of it was Sam's own account. How he had found her on the road, how he had nursed her back to health, how they had faced Holloway together and won. Tears streamed down her face as she read. "From beaten and abandoned on a roadside to this," she murmured, gesturing to their home, their land, the distant laughter of their children playing in the yard. "It seems impossible." "Not impossible," Sam said, taking her hand. "Just unlikely, like most good things in life." That evening, they sat on the porch long after the children had gone to bed. The stars were bright above them, and the night air was cool and crisp. An owl hooted somewhere in the darkness. The cattle lowed softly in their pasture. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had been different?" Eleanor asked. "If Holloway had succeeded, if you had not found me?" "Sometimes," Sam admitted, "but I try not to dwell on it. The past is past. What matters is now." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I used to have nightmares about that day, about lying on the road feeling my life slip away. But I have not dreamed about it in years. You replaced the nightmares with something better." He kissed her forehead. "You did the same for me. Then I suppose we saved each other. I suppose we did." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the night. An owl calling from the barn. Wind rustling through the trees. The distant lowing of cattle settling in for sleep. From tragedy had come triumph. From violence, peace. From a chance encounter on a lonely trail, a love that had not only healed wounds, but built something enduring and beautiful. 20 years after Eleanor arrived at Pinewood Ranch, the property had transformed beyond recognition. The modest two-story farmhouse had grown into a sprawling homestead, with additions for the growing family and improvements to make work easier. The barn had been rebuilt twice, each time larger than before, and the herd had expanded from a few dozen cattle to several hundred. William Crawford, now a young man of 21, managed the day-to-day operations of the ranch. He had inherited his father's steady temperament and his mother's sharp mind, making him an ideal successor to the family business. The twins, Emma and Grace, had both married local men and started families of their own, though they visited the ranch frequently with their children. The house that had once been too quiet was now often filled with the chaos of grandchildren running through the halls. Sam's hair had turned gray at the temples, and Eleanor's honey blonde had faded to silver. But the love between them had not diminished. If anything, it had deepened over the years, weathered by time and strengthened by shared experience. They still sat on the porch every evening, watching the sunset and talking about whatever came to mind. "I was thinking about Dorothy today," Eleanor said one spring evening. "Do you remember how she helped us escape from the cathedral?" "I remember thinking we were all going to die," Sam admitted. "And then there she was, distracting Holloway at exactly the right moment. She always did have perfect timing." Eleanor smiled at the memory. "I miss her." Dorothy had passed away 2 years earlier, peacefully in her sleep, after a long career as one of Sacramento's most respected nurses. The funeral had been well attended, and Eleanor had given a eulogy that left not a dry eye in the church. She would have liked seeing this, Eleanor continued, gesturing at the ranch spread out before them. "Everything we built. She always said I deserved good things." "You did deserve them," Sam said firmly. "You still do." Eleanor took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long familiarity. "We both do." In the soft gathering darkness of an August evening, 53 years after Sam Crawford found a beaten woman on a dusty California road, Eleanor sat in her usual chair on the porch of Pinewood Ranch. She was alone now. Sam had passed peacefully in his sleep 3 months earlier, his hand still clasped in hers when the morning light revealed he was gone. The grief had been overwhelming at first, a wave that threatened to drown her, but gradually it had transformed into something gentler, a bittersweet ache that reminded her of how much she had been loved. The children had wanted her to move in with one of them. William had offered her a room in the main house, which he now ran with his own wife and children. Emma and Grace had both invited her to live in town, where she would have company and care. But Eleanor had refused. This was her home, the place where she and Sam had built their life together. She was not ready to leave it. She was not sure she ever would be. Besides, she told them, "I am not alone here. Your father is everywhere I look." And it was true. She saw him in the barn he had built with his own hands, in the fields where they had worked side by side, in the chair beside hers, empty now, but still holding the impression of his presence. The leather-bound journal he had given her on their 10th anniversary sat in her lap. She had been reading it again, as she often did since his passing, reliving their story through his words. From tragedy had come triumph. That was what Sam had written on the final page. From violence, peace. From a chance encounter on a lonely trail, a love that endured. Eleanor closed the journal and looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the evening sky. Somewhere out there, she believed Sam was watching, waiting for her, as he had always waited. She was 92 years old. Her hair was white, her body frail, her eyesight failing. But her mind was sharp, and her heart was full of gratitude for the life she had been given. A life she had almost lost on a dusty road in 1873. She thought about the young woman she had been back then, frightened, alone, left for dead by men who saw her as nothing more than an obstacle to their greed. That woman had been certain she was going to die, but she had not died. She had survived. And not just survived, she had thrived, loved, built a family and a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. That was the real victory, she realized, not defeating Holloway or clearing her name or winning the settlement. The real victory was every single day she had lived fully, loved deeply, and refused to let tragedy define her. A gentle breeze stirred the evening air, carrying the scent of wildflowers and hay. Eleanor closed her eyes and let it wash over her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding me, for saving me, for giving me everything." She did not know if Sam could hear her, but she liked to think he could. She liked to think he was smiling somewhere, proud of the woman she had become, the woman he had helped her become. William found her the next morning, still sitting in her chair. Her face was peaceful, her hand resting on the journal. She had passed some time in the night quietly and without pain. When they buried her beside Sam on the hill overlooking the ranch, the whole community came to pay their respects. The preacher spoke of love and faith and the promise of reunion. The children and grandchildren went out and remembered. But the truth of Eleanor Crawford's life could not be captured in a eulogy. It was written in the land she had helped cultivate, in the family she had raised, in the countless lives she had touched over more than half a century on the California frontier. She had been beaten down, but not broken. accused but not defeated, left for dead but determined to live. And in the end, she had not just survived, she had triumphed. That is the lesson of this story, the truth worth remembering. No matter how dark things get, no matter how hopeless they seem, there is always a road forward. There is always someone willing to help if you are brave enough to accept their hand. Eleanor Whitmore found her second chance on a lonely road in 1873. She seized it with both hands and never let go. May we all be so courageous. May we all find our Sam Crawford. May we all, when our time comes, be able to look back on our lives and say, I was beaten down, but I got back up. I was left for dead, but I chose to live. And what a life it was.